Drum recording doesn't really have to be difficult. Achieving a great sound is a combination of decent microphones, excellent microphone placement, and of course a good drummer. So it's not really up to using the most expensive mic or the most expensive preamp. In fact, I will show you how I do it using pretty standard equipment. You will need 4 things. You will need between 8 and 14 microphones. You will need an audio interface with the same amount of preamps as microphones you are using. You will need mic stands and XLR cables, of course, a computer or a laptop with a DAW, and least the recording room should be acoustically optimized. I really want to emphasize this aspect because this is something that a lot of people usually forget. You can record drums without treating your room, but you will definitely get a much better sound if your room is acoustically treated. You don't need to do a lot of acoustic treatment. In fact, just a little bit around the drums is just enough. If you want to learn more about acoustic treatment, I will leave a link in the description of an article I wrote about how to treat your room very cheaply. Okay, so the first step is gonna be to set up your microphones. I'm gonna be using 14 microphones for this recording. I'll be using 2 mics for the kick drum, one dynamic mic for the inside, an AKG D112, and a condenser microphone for outside of the bass drum. I'm gonna be using this Neumann U87. You don't really need to use that microphone that is that expensive. In fact, I've been using the Rode NT1A for this purpose, and this works perfectly fine. 2 mics for the snare, one for the top and one for the bottom. For the top of the snare, I'll be using the Shure SM57, which is the most popular mic for the snare. And for the bottom of the snare, I'll be using an Audio-Technica ATM450, which sounds really, really nice because it captures this crisp and this bright frequencies of the snare. For the hi-hat, I'll be using a small diaphragm condenser microphone also, the Audio-Technica AT441. As this drum kit has 3 toms, I'll be using 3 tom microphones. I'll be using the Sennheiser E604. This drum kit has a timbale, so the timbale has similar sound characteristics to the snare, so I'll be using the same microphone as Shure SM57 for the timbale. For the overheads, I'll be using 2 small diaphragm condenser microphones, the AKG C451B. And last, as room microphones, I'll be using 2 large diaphragm condenser mics, the Rode NT1A. Before you even start recording, you need to tune your drums. You have to try to get the sound you like before you even record. So if you're going for a bright drum sound, you need to tune your drums accordingly high. But if you're going for a more dark sound, you need to tune your drums low. It's very difficult to shape the sound afterwards with EQ or compressor. Of course, there are possibilities, but your life will be so much easier if you get the drum sound from the beginning on. To tune your drums, you need to use a drum key to tighten the tension rods on the side of the drum. Turn each tension rod the same amount of times. It's bad if one tension rod is more tight than another one because then the drum will have different sounds depending on which part you hit. You may have to tune both heads, the top head and the bottom head. If you want your drum kit to sound less resonant, you can either remove the bottom head or you can dampen the drums using a t-shirt or something similar. The microphone placement plays a very important role in the final sound that you will get, so you really need to put a lot of attention in this. So the bass drum is usually mic'd with 2 microphones. You usually use a dynamic microphone inside the bass drum to capture the attack and all this punch. But you also use a condenser microphone outside the bass drum. It doesn't really have to be always outside. There's 2 options. So you can use a large diaphragm condenser mic like this one outside of the bass drum. You just put it in front of it. Or you can use a boundary mic. These mics are placed inside of the bass drum. They are also condenser microphones and they work in a similar way. They capture more of this low end that a dynamic mic just can't capture. So whatever option you use, I always recommend using 2 mics for the bass drum because it's gonna give you much more possibilities when mixing, combining the 2 sounds, and you will have more options at the end of the day. For the inside microphone, if the bass drum has an outer drum head and there's a hole in it, you can just put it inside of the hole. If it doesn't have a hole, you need to put it just directly in front of the bass drum as close as possible, or you can just remove the whole head as I did in my drum kit. There's 2 important aspects to consider when placing this microphone. One is the distance from the microphone to the drum head, and the other one is the angle in which the microphone is positioned. So about the distance. If the microphone is close to the drum head where the pedal hits, the sound has more attack but less body and less bottom end in general. But if you put the microphone further away, it has less attack but more body. You usually want to start just behind the front drum head. Have a listen and adjust it from there. And about the angle. If the microphone points directly where the pedal hits, the sound gets a lot of attack and it can quickly become unpleasant. This can be, for example, suitable for metal, where the kick has to be very pointy, but for most other genres this can be too much. If you move the mic slightly off axis, the sound has less attack and sounds more natural. This is usually the way to go. You want to start with the microphone placed slightly off axis and adjust it from there. If you want more attack, you can move it on axis, but if it's too much, just move it further away. So you may need to record and readjust the position of the microphones a couple of times because you need to listen how the different position sounds, especially if it's the first time, because you don't know how the different positions will sound. So I really recommend that. You just place the microphones, record, have a listen, and readjust. The outside microphone is placed 5 to 15 centimeters away from the outer drum head, and our goal with this microphone is to pick at the very low bottom end that the dynamic microphone from the inside just can't pick. You could say that the inner microphone provides clarity and definition, and the outer microphone provides volume and power. Condenser microphones are best for this purpose because they have the very best low-end response. So you can use a regular large diaphragm microphone, as I said. You can use boundary mics, or you can also use a special sub-kick microphone. These are very big microphones, originally made from Yamaha, but I think meanwhile there's other brands that are selling it. They all capture the very low end very good, so even the cheap condenser microphones will do the job. Next, we have to take care of the snare drum. Since the snare drum is also such an important element of the drum kit, it is also usually mic'd with 2 microphones. But if you don't have this possibility, one microphone will also do the job perfectly fine. The top microphone is usually a dynamic mic, very often a Shure SM57, placed directly above the snare and aimed either at the center of the drum or at the rim. So the distance of the microphone from the snare and its direction have a huge influence on the sound. The closer the mic is to the snare, the more attack it picks up, so the snare sounds very punchy and assertive when it is close to the head. The low end is also emphasized because of the proximity effect. If you move the mic further away, the sound will have less attack and less low end. The angle of the microphone also plays an important role. If you point the microphone directly at the center of the drum, you will get a stronger low end but less of the actual snare sound with all the resonances. If you tilt the microphone more towards the edge of the snare drum, it will sound more natural because it will pick up more of the resonances that you would expect from a snare drum. Again, you need to experiment, record and compare positions until you find the perfect one at the beginning. When you have some experience, you will instinctively place the microphone correctly right away, but at the beginning you just don't have the experience, so just try and try. A good starting point is a distance of about 3 to 4 centimeters between the microphone and the snare, and a tilt where the microphone is not aimed directly at the center, but rather between the center and the edge. So one very important thing to note is that the microphone cannot interfere with the drummer in any way. You cannot expect a drummer to play differently to what he's used to because the microphone is in the middle or something. The drummer needs to play as he's used to, because if that's not the case, the performance will be worse. The bottom microphone is not always necessary, but if you have the possibility, I always recommend it because it gives you more possibilities when mixing. You can use the same microphone as on the top. A Shure SM57 works very well as well, but I prefer to use a condenser mic because it picks up more detail and more of the high frequencies. You can use any condenser mic that you want, like the AKG C414 for example, or the Rode NT1A. I'll be using the Audio-Technica ATM 450, which has a small diaphragm. This second microphone is placed under the snare drum and picks up the bright resonances of the snare carpet and the bass. This makes the sound a little crispier and brighter. It is placed 5 to 10 centimeters from the bottom of the drum, often with no tilt. If you want to dampen the snare drum a bit for recording the drums, you can very well use a t-shirt or similar for this. Of course, there are special damping rigs for this, but a t-shirt or generally something made of fabric does it too. Just stretch it over the top skin and you'll hear a significant damping. It's very important to watch out for phase problems when you are using two microphones for the same source. Generally speaking, if you're using a condenser microphone and a dynamic microphone, you won't have so many phase problems because the sound is very different. But if you are using the same microphone for the top and for the bottom of the snare, you can have phase problems. So you really need to listen to both channels and maybe reverse the polarity of the bottom microphone and listen and compare how it sounds better. Next, we're going to be taking care of the hi-hat. The hi-hat doesn't always get a separate microphone because it is usually heard very well over the overheads, but I really prefer to use a separate mic because it gives you more possibilities when mixing. For example, if you are not using a hi-hat microphone, but you notice that the hi-hat is too quiet, but the crashes are just okay, you don't have a possibility to level this difference because if you turn up the overheads, you will turn up the crashes. The hi-hat is usually recorded with a small diaphragm condenser mic because it picks up all the details and all the high frequencies very well. It is very important when placing the microphone to place it at a significant distance because the proximity effect can sound very, very bad on the hi-hat because you expect the hi-hat to sound bright and not to sound dark. In most of the cases, of course. I always place it 5 to 15 centimeters from the hi-hat, and I tend to tilt the microphone away from the snare because I don't want the snare to be sounding over the hi-hat microphone because the snare is very loud and that is usually a problem that you get. The toms are relatively easy to record and are quite similar to the snare. You usually use dynamic microphones for the toms, but sometimes you can use condenser mics if you want to pick up more of the low end. I always recommend using the same microphone for all the toms of the kit to get a homogeneous sound. The most popular microphone for the toms is undoubtedly the Sennheiser MD421. However, it's a bit expensive. I think it's about 400 euros. So I myself use the Sennheiser E604. These are way cheaper and sound also very good. I have 3 of them and I'm really happy with them. I find it very practical that you can attach them directly to the tom so you don't need a separate stand. The position of the microphone affects the sound in a similar way to the snare drum. A close placement emphasizes the low frequencies due to the proximity effect, which actually suits the drums very well. A far placement sounds a bit more natural, but then you can get bleeding problems because the toms mix with each other in the channels. When placing the microphone very close, it is unavoidable to point the microphone at the edge of the toms so that the drummer does not hit the microphone with his sticks. This makes the attack a little bit more moderate than if the mic is placed a little further away and aim at the center of the drum head. In this case, the attack is emphasized very much, similar to the snare, and can sound a bit unnatural. Okay, now it's time for the overheads, 2 of the most important mics. The overheads are 2 microphones that are placed above the drum kit, and they mainly record the cymbals but also pick up the whole drum kit in a stereo configuration. You always have to use condenser microphones as overheads because these sound the most natural of all. They pick up the broadest frequency range. You can choose between large diaphragm or small diaphragm condenser mics. Large diaphragm will emphasize more of the bass drum. Small diaphragm condenser mics sound more natural and pick up more details. I myself will be using 2 small diaphragm condenser mics for this. There are many different techniques for stereo microphone placement. I myself prefer to use the XY arrangement and place the microphones very close to each other to avoid phase problems, but you can choose any technique that you like. Last, we'll be placing the room microphones. The room microphones are my personal favorite because I think they make the drums sound very realistic and it's the most similar way to how we hear the drums. We don't hear the drums by placing the ear so very close to the drums. Of course, you need good acoustics to use room microphones because they are placed very far away and pick up a lot of reflections. So if your room is not acoustically treated, don't use room microphones. But if your room is okay, definitely use them. You usually use 2 large diaphragm condenser microphones because they sound very, very natural and very big in general. And you place these microphones between 1 or 10 meters from the drum kit, depending on how much of a natural reverb you want. If you place the room microphones close to the drum kit, you will get a more dry sound. But if you place the microphones very far away from the drum kit, you will get a lot of natural reverb, which can be quite nice. I like to place the room microphones in a straight line to the bass drum because this is usually the center of the kit. Okay, so the second step will be now to connect everything. I always recommend to use some kind of logical system. You can use colors for your cables, or you can write everything down, because when recording drums, there's so many microphones, there's so many cables that it's very easy to get confused very quickly, and this can be quite a mess, and it can make you lose a lot of time if you are looking for say the cable for the snare drum and you don't know right away where it is. So I already connected all the cables to the multicore, which goes directly to my console. So channel 1 of the multicore goes to channel 1 of the console, channel 2 from the multicore goes to the channel 2 of the console, and the console goes straight to the interface. So when I connect anything to channel 1 from the multicore, it ends up on channel 1 of the interface. And this is for all the 32 channels. So in the modern digital age, you don't need to pay attention to the headroom or anything, because using 24-bit recording, you have a lot of headroom. So you can record actually quiet and turn up the level later. You just need to avoid clipping or distortion. That's the only thing you need to take care of. So when setting your levels, always turn up the preamp and try keeping the signal on the green level, maybe reaching the yellow, that's okay, but try not to reach the red. All interfaces have a way to measure the peaks and some kind of display, so you can see what the input level is on every channel. To raise or lower the level, you simply need to adjust the gain of the preamp, mixer, or in the audio interface to the desired level. Next thing we need to take care of is monitoring. If you're just recording yourself, you only will need one pair of headphones. If you're recording someone else, you will need 2 pairs of headphones, and ideally you will need 2 separate mixes. If you don't have the possibility to make 2 separate mixes, just make one mix for the drummer, and this will be the same mix that you as the audio engineer will get. The drummer should hear himself as well as the click track very well through the headphones. There are special headphones for drummers, for example these ones, the Beyerdynamic DT770M. They isolate much more from the outside, so the drummer can hear himself playing through the microphones and not so much of the drum kit. So the next step will be to set up your DAW project. You will need the same amount of recording channels as microphones that you have placed, and ideally you will need some kind of backing track so that the drummer has some kind of orientation to where he is in the middle of the song. For example, I always create kind of a rhythm section, a rough mix of it, a rough recording, so that the drummer has some orientation, and I also try to get the vocalist to record the vocals, a rough version also, so the drummer can play accordingly to what he's hearing that the singer is singing. So for example, if the singer makes a break, the drummer can fill this break with a fill. So I prepared this Pro Tools project with all the backing tracks, and now I'm gonna create my 13 tracks for the drum set. It's important to name the tracks correctly, and I like to keep them in the same order as they connected to the interface, so everything is organized. You definitely have to group the tracks together. This way you will make sure that when you record, all the tracks start recording at the same time. And when you are editing later, all the edits you make happen to all the tracks at the same time and are perfectly synchronized. You need to treat all the tracks as one instrument when you are editing. You cannot move or cut only one track in general, as everything will then sound out of sync. There's definitely exceptions here. For example, if the drummer accidentally hits a tom microphone, you of course need to just cut this piece of audio on this microphone. After selecting the correct input channel for every track and grouping all the drum tracks together, you need to enable recording on them. So when you press record, you will start recording on all of them simultaneously. When you're recording drums, I always recommend to use the comping technique. That means recording many takes for the same song within the same track, just by creating individual playlists. This way you can change or replace a part with another if you find any mistakes, or you can just simply listen to all the takes and pick the best ones for every part. If you're recording with a click, everything will be synchronized. So this is a very controversial topic in the world of drum recording. You don't need to record with a click track, but it's highly recommended. Recording with a click track opens much more editing possibilities. As I said, for example, comping, you can record many takes, listen to them, see which one is better, and just copy the parts. If you're not recording with a click, it's very difficult that all the tracks are synchronized. So if you can record with a click, if you don't know, or if the drummer doesn't know how to record with a click, do it without it, but really try to get the drummer to practice recording with a click, because in the long term it will be much better.